Hello, we are now looking at chapter 6 of part 5. The title of this chapter is Behold, I Come to Do Thy Will, O God. In this chapter, Guardini is going to take us into the human environments that Jesus had to confront in the holy city. That's what he starts out with, this question. What did Jesus find in the holy city he entered with his supreme claim? What powers were at work? And he's talking about what political groups and factions of human beings were operating, right? What was the attitude of the people toward him? What his position in a situation drawing to its close. Okay, so this is a look at the people, and so Guardini starts with those who call themselves the pure. Okay, so these are the heroic, so to speak, in quotation marks, heroic religious figures, the pure, the Pharisees. From the point of view of character as well as politically, this is the strongest and most determined group. The real bearers of historical consciousness among the Jewish people. Okay? Still under the influence of the warlike Maccabeans. Okay? So that they have a lot of historical memory of the struggle of Judas Maccabeus and his brothers who fought against those who were trying to oppress the people in the about 150 years before Christ. And the Pharisees were convinced that the kingdom of Israel will spread from Jerusalem over the entire world. They were very clear that they felt that they had a vocation to the whole world, starting in Jerusalem. And they're ready, these Pharisees are, to stake everything on the realization of their dream. They take themselves very seriously. And that I think is important. When Jesus appears on the scene, they feel at once the reality of salvation, for which he stands directly contradicts their own. So they're immediately aware that Jesus has a different way. Okay. Consequently, they consider him an enemy who must be eliminated and apply all possible means to that end. Okay. Then there's a group of Sadducees. They were hated by the Pharisees, whom they in turn cordially despise. The Sadducees would be described by Guardini here as cosmopolitans. They had severed all ties with their own history. Okay, they were more interested in getting along with the Hellenistic culture, and they adopted that culture. They're intellectually alert, they have many-sided interests, and they enjoy life. Okay, so they're not considered yet. They're contrasted with the Pharisees, who were the pure. You see, their politics are international and conciliatory. In other words, they want to get along with the powers in the world. Spiritually, they're rationalists and skeptics. Okay, so rationalists and skeptics. They consider Jesus an enthusiast, right? One of the many of his day. For a long time, they ignore him completely, and their first clash with him comes late. And the people, now we're talking about the people that aren't in either one of those two parties, the Pharisees or the Sadducees. Instinctively, the people, they sense the Messiah in this wonderful man and press him to act. He resists, knowing that their conception of God's kingdom is essentially that of the Pharisees. So the people are not Pharisees, but they have their thought life, the way they think, formed by that of the Pharisees. The masses bring Jesus their problems, and they're sick. They listen to his words, spellbound. They're deeply shaken by his demonstrations of power. However, they are unable to reach a clear decision concerning him, but veer first in one direction, then in another, as the mood of the moment blows them. So they're definitely blown this way and that. Like St. Paul describes people who are blown in different directions according to their passions by different doctrines. There is no one there to help them to take a decisive step. So they remain the tool of those who happen to have the word. Finally, there are the various rulers, and they see no reason why they should be forced into any decision. Jesus' compatriot Herod is a pleasure-loving, impotent despot. True, as we see from his discussions with John the Baptist, he's not insensible to religious personality, though he does not allow this weakness to interfere with his doings. For a lightly given, quote, word of honor, unquote, he sacrifices the last of the prophets. He's also interested in the new prophet, with a capital P, meaning Jesus, as he would be in any new sensation. A fool, the man who ever counted on the fox. That's his nickname, right? Herod the Fox. As for the real representatives of power in Palestine, Caesar's procurator, he has never even seen Jesus. He knows that the times are thick with wandering preachers and miracle workers, and if he ever heard of the, quote, carpenter's son, he probably held him for one of these. This is then the little world into which Jesus walked, proclaiming his message. So you step back, and Guardini's giving you a sketch for the little world of Jesus. Okay? And he working miracles suggested by the people's distress or the spiritual demands of the moment. He exhorted, summoned, aroused. Not only did he attempt to drive home a teaching, demonstrate a way of salvation, proclaim a new interpretation of the kingdom, he tried to make men conscious of the stupendous reality knocking at their doors. Now is the hour. Now is the hour. God's kingdom is at the gates of history, ready to enter. God has risen to his feet. The moment for sacred fulfillment is ripe. Come. See? That's the spirit of Guardini, I think, captures that really well. The spirit of Christ's proclamation. You know, behold, the kingdom of God is at hand. See? Looking closer, however, we see more. Jesus is flinging all his strength into this hour, advancing with all the love of which he's capable. He does not think of himself. He's a man for others. He knows neither pleasure nor comfort, neither fear nor false consideration. He is completely and entirely messenger, prophet, and more than a prophet. Okay? Messenger, prophet, and more than a prophet. And still, we do not gain the impression of a man working toward like a fixed goal, says Guardini. Perhaps the reply is to that concern, that this is his reply. What is at stake is too huge to be, quote, worked, end of quote, worked for. Such things happen of themselves. He only proclaims them, clears the way for them, as all prophets have done. But is there in Jesus the restless drive that constantly spurred an Elijah? Has the hand with a capital H laid itself on him as it did on Jeremiah, who still proclaiming the word of God broke under its weight? No. Jesus is the bringer of the tidings of all tidings, but they neither crush nor drive him. He and his message are one. Okay? So there is a difference between the prophets and the person who's beyond being a prophet. He's more than a prophet. Okay? And then Guardini immediately qualifies it. True, he is anxious that everything be accomplished, but this is his own intrinsic desire for consummation, not pressure from above. So, yeah, he has an intrinsic desire that's stronger than anything, but it's not pressure from the exterior. That's what Guardini's getting at. And Satan, okay, there you go. I'm sorry, I jumped ahead here. Or is Jesus a fighter? One is tempted to imagine him one of those great and noble figures. But does he really fight? Guardini says, I do not believe so. Certainly he had adversaries, but he never really considered them such or treated them accordingly. His real enemy was the condition of the world and Satan. Okay. That is what you got to keep in mind. That's his real enemy. Okay? And the condition of the world and Satan, who supports it, meaning the condition of the world against God. But, Guardini continues, even Satan is no adversary in the full sense of the word, for Jesus in no way recognizes him as an equal. In the final analysis, he does not fight. For that, he's too serene. Now, that really flies in the face of a lot of other images we have of Jesus. So we better step back. He's serene. He has the fullness of truth in his very being, in serenity. Okay? Guardini continues, we penetrate deeper into the soul of the Lord only when we see his deeds and his conduct from a central point of view outside the world. That's what Guardini is getting at. The moment we try to fit him into any familiar human category, all genuine recognition is destroyed. Now, so that's how Guardini is working through his understanding. He's sketching it out, the mystery of the incarnation. So he goes on. After an initial period of apostolic plenitude, both in word and deed, we see the crisis gathering. That's a word, the gathering storm, right? And how first in Jerusalem, then in Galilee, the decision falls out against Jesus. Okay? Once it is definite, he goes not because he is forced to or in desperation, but calmly resolved to Jerusalem. Okay? And to the death he knows awaits him there. We've already seen what takes place. The revelationary character of Jesus' entry, riding on the donkey, for example. The spirit of prophecy upon the multitude who now breathlessly await the expected signs of the Messiah and the establishment of the kingdom. So the people are responding to this. From the viewpoint of truth, they are hopelessly entangled in earthly expectation. And as soon as they see that their Messiah is politically powerless, their dream collapses. Okay? The Pharisees, who are prepared to go to any length, wait for this moment. They still fear the people, who feel essentially as they do. But the people attempt to force Christ to fit their conception of the Messiah, where the Pharisees are out and out hostile. So here you have some people who are pushing on him, like the crowds, and pushing on him to manifest his messiahship, whereas the Pharisees are already hostile to it. All that separates the masses from their leaders is a misconception. But as long as it exists, the Pharisees must be cautious. Now the Sadducees and Hellenists also become uneasy. They fear a political embroilment and begin to discuss among themselves how this dangerous fanatic might best be stamped out. What does Jesus do? Now, Guardini's outlining what's happening. What does Jesus do? And then Guardini takes us on one of those journeys where we think about the possibilities. A man convinced of his high mission and placed in a similar position would have done everything possible to drive home the truth. He would have spoken with the priests, the scribes, with those who had influence among the people. He would have taken scripture to hand and clarified his identity with the aid of the messianic prophecies. He would have attempted to recapture the hearts of the crowd, to reveal to them the essence of his teaching, and to win them over to his side. Is this what happens? No. Okay? So Guardini is going like, this would be the normal human path in a situation like this. But the answer is Jesus doesn't take that path. So Guardini continues, Jesus does proclaim the truth, and his words are powerful and penetrating, but he makes nothing like the effort we expect of him. That's the difference. And his manner is anything but winning. It has something uncompromising about it, harsh and challenging. One eager to do everything in his power to swing a crisis in his favor does not speak as Jesus speaks. The man we mentioned might also have reasoned thus: the time for persuasion is past, now for action. So that might be another response, normal human response, right? We set aside the effort to persuade and we just act in the face of the malice of others. Okay? The adversary, impermeable to reason, must be met on his own grounds, this other person would reason. Let's meet force with force. Let's fight fire with fire, as they say. He would have attacked each group at its weakest point. He would have played the Sadducees against the Pharisees and vice versa. He would have appealed to the people, would have warned them, stirred them to action, would have denounced their leaders and won them over. Or he would have realized that the odds were against him and flee. He could easily have done so. The Pharisees even expected him to. Notice what Jesus says, "You will seek me and will not find me, and where I am you cannot come." The Jews therefore said among themselves, "Where is he going that we shall not find him? Will he go to those dispersed among the Gentiles and teach the Gentiles?" Our man, our imaginary man in the face of what Jesus had to face, our man, that's what he means, Guardini, would probably have done so. He would have gone to Alexandria or to Rome, certain of finding open ears there and hopeful of returning later under more favorable conditions. But this idea is totally foreign to Jesus. Okay? But Jesus is not going to approach it like that. Okay? There remains one more possibility, that our man admit himself defeated and, according to his nature, exhausted, despairingly, or proudly, die. Perhaps he would even fling himself into death as into the mysterious counterpole of success, reckoning on the logic of death and life, catastrophe and new beginning. Nothing of all this applies to Jesus. Okay? So there's no human calculation in the same way that Guardini posits this other guy that would do it a different way. Okay? It just doesn't work that way. Nothing of all this applies to Jesus. Though attempts were made into the period in which the end times, the eschatological, was in vogue, to prove that when all possibility of earthly success was clearly out of the question, Jesus played upon the success, the quote, success of a failure, end of quote, on the mysterious intervention of God, hoping that from his death would come the fulfillment of all things. Guardini continues, actually, there can be no talk of this. Jesus does not capitulate. Never is there the slightest trace of breakdown, quote unquote. And it is false to speak only of catastrophe, as it is to take his earthly failure in a bound of mystic enthusiasm that tries to make a creative downfall of his death. Okay? Guardini would have none of that. He wants us to understand a much more realistic, from his standpoint, gospel. Okay? He says this idea is that he's critiquing the old idea of the creative downfall of his death. This is unrealistically exalted, and by comparison with the truth, thin psychology. Guardini continues, here is something quite different. Let's see what it is. What? If we follow the gospel reports of Jesus' last days closely, we find nothing of extreme concentration on a single goal, nothing of relentless effort or struggle in the usual sense of the word. Jesus' attitude is entirely serene. There comes that word again. Serene. He says what he has come to say, unmitigatingly, objectively, not with an eye to its acceptance, but as it must be said. Okay? He neither attacks nor retreats. He hopes for nothing as humans hope, and fears nothing. Okay? when he goes to Bethania by night and stays with friends because of the opposition against him, this does not mean that he fears his enemies, but simply that the ultimate is postponed because its hour is not yet ripe. Jesus' soul knows no fear, not only because he's naturally courageous, but because the center of his being lies far beyond the reach of anything fearful. Okay? Perfect love casts out all fear. That's what I think about when I read that. Therefore, he cannot really be called audacious in the human sense. Right? He is only completely free. The perfect love sets us free. That's the idea. And Jesus lives and moves and has his being in that perfect love. That's what Guardini is saying. He's only completely free for what in every minute of his life must be done. And he does it with unutterable calm and sovereignty. The calm, sovereignty, and serenity of his perfection, his perfect love. The more closely we distinguish between Jesus and any other man, the more clearly we see what is happening here is not measurable by human standards. Okay? That's what's important. True, Guardini continues, here, it is conceived by the human spirit, willed by human will, experienced by the most ardent and sensitive of human hearts. That's true. But its origin and the power with which it is consummated give Jesus a greatness outside human comprehension. Okay? So God's will is done, and Jesus wills this will. Okay? It is humanity's second great test and failure, brought about by a specific people at a specific time, but because of our solidarity with all human existence, also to our woe. So when we're looking at Jesus facing down his passion in his perfection, we also realize that we caused it with our sin. And that's what Guardini is getting at. He says, to repeat that let's look at that last sentence one more time. So God's will is done, and Jesus wills this will. Okay? He does it perfectly. He's like us in all things except sin. It is humanity's second great test and failure, whether they were going to accept Jesus or not. Right? That's what Guardini's getting at. This second great test and failure is brought about by a specific people at a specific time, right? But because of our solidarity with all human existence, what happened to Jesus is also to our woe. In other words, we don't just lean it all on that generation of people that rejected him when they rejected him. We recognize that there's a solidarity in all humanity, with all human existence, that shares responsibility for what happened to Jesus. Sinners are the author of Christ's passion. And sin is our woe. Thank you very much.
That was right there.